Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the presentation on an economic report we wrote on inflation. In this report, we will talk about the causes behind it and the consequences that it can have and some solutions or ways to manage it. These are our group members who contributed in writing this report. Inflation is a rising prominent economic problem. Basically, what inflation is the rate at which the price of goods and services rise over time. What this means is the purchasing power of consumers decrease and the purchasing power of currency also decreases. In this report, we will see how it affects different types of markets and the reasons behind the inflation rising in the first place. And at the end, we will try to find out how policymakers come up with some solutions or ways that we can try to manage inflation.
Now we will talk about some causes of inflation. Inflation is caused by numerous reasons and has a lot of factors in play. One of the most significant factors in play is the dynamic between supply and demand. So when demand for goods and services exceeds supply, this leads to a rise in price. This also causes a decrease in the purchasing power of money. So now we will learn how this increase in demand happened. Because of COVID-19 pandemic, it had a huge effect on demand. You would think there would be less demand, but the demand for e-commerce skyrocketed. This led to a supply chain disruption. So what happened was there's a lot of cargoes in a lot of places with a lot of goods which are not being able to be delivered because of the supply chain disruption. After that, before this supply chain disruption could heal, the war between Ukraine and Russia broke out, which led to a further increase in disruption in supply chain. Because Russia and Ukraine provided a lot of food, a lot of oil, and majority of gases, this led to a huge crisis of these products. So the reason being, this made the increase in demand more and the supply less, which led to further inflation. Thank you.
Inflation has many causes, but I'm going to talk if monopolies are one of them. Competition is driving force behind innovation, efficiency, and price stability in the market economies. It encourages businesses to offer better products and services, reduce costs, and offer competitive prices. In a competitive market, businesses must constantly strive to improve their offerings to stay ahead of their rivals and attract customers. This dynamic creates a virtuous cycle of innovation and growth that benefits consumers and the economy as a whole. On the other hand, monopolies and high market concentration can harm consumers by reducing choice, increasing pricing, and lowering quality. A monopoly occurs when a single seller dominates the market and there are no close substitutes available for that product or service. This allows the monopolies to exercise significant power, which can lead to higher prices, reduced choice, and lower quality for consumers. Monopolies maximize their profit when marginal cost equals marginal revenue, but unlike firms in competitive markets, they can set prices higher than marginal cost, which results in deadweight loss and reduction in consumer surplus or consumer welfare. Recently, there has been growing concern about the rise in the market concentration, which refers to the distribution of market shares among businesses in a specific industry. Higher market concentration means that a few major companies hold a significant portion of the market power, which can limit competition and allow businesses to exercise market power. The degree of concentration can be measured using the Herfindahl-Harshman index, which is the sum of the squares of market shares. One of the consequences of high market concentration is increased pass-through of cost shocks into prices. Cost shocks are unexpected changes in the cost of production for firms, which can result from various factors such as changes in input price, taxes, or regulations, or for example, recently from war in Ukraine or COVID-19. In more competitive markets, firms need to consider the loss of market share when deciding whether to pass the cost shock onto consumers. This can result in them absorbing the cost shock by reducing profit margins. In contrast, monopolies have less concern about losing customers and are more willing to increase their price, their goods for service. Furthermore, firms that have high market power can engage in price discrimination, which means that they can target consumers that are less sensitive to change in pass cost shocks to more effectively. Recent research by Browning and others at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston has shown that market concentration increases the impact of cost shocks on inflation. They found that pass-through is 25% larger for 3 quarters following a 0.02 increase in HHI index, indicating that market concentration increased the impact of cost shock on inflation. Market concentration has been on the rise in recent years, which HHI increasing by 50% from 2005 to 2020. This trend has been accelerated by COVID-19 pandemic and its restructuring industries.
Now I'll be talking about the effect of inflation on a perfectly competitive market. Let's begin by talking about what a perfectly competitive market is. In perfectly competitive markets, the buyers and sellers have no market power to influence prices. In such markets, the prices are determined solely by the force of demand and supply. Inflation can shift the market conditions of a perfectly competitive market and lead to several consequences, and I will be discussing about some of these consequences. The first consequence is that it could lead to an increase in production cost, such as cost of raw materials and labor. This can result in a decrease in profit margin for firms. As well as this, inflation can also cause a redistribution of income and wealth between producers and consumers. Especially, consumers with fixed incomes will have to face the consequences. Moreover, inflation can lead to decrease in the purchasing power of consumers, which will eventually cause a decrease in demand for products and services. Another major consequence is that inflation can cause uncertainty and instability in perfectly competitive markets, leading to a decrease in investment and economic growth. Therefore, as I have discussed, inflation can have significant consequences in perfectly competitive markets, leading to increased production cost, a redistribution of income and wealth, a decrease in purchasing power, and economic instability.
Now let's talk about another type of market where inflation has an effect. In imperfectly competitive markets, inflation also affects the same way as the perfectly competitive markets. The costs increase and so does the labor costs. But however, in imperfectly competitive markets, firms have a certain degree of market power where they can raise prices for a while without losing market share. And this acts as a disincentive to firms for raising prices. They can raise prices all they want and it will only decrease consumer surplus and consumer welfare. The deadweight loss occurs because of consumer suffering, and policymakers need to find just the right balance so that both the producers and the consumers lose out in the same way without and minimizing deadweight loss.
Now we will be going through a way to manage inflation. Central banks play a crucial role in managing inflation through their monetary policies such as controlling money supply, managing inflation expectations, and adjusting interest rates. However, there are some concerns about the ethical implications of interest rate control, especially during the recent challenging times such as COVID-19 and the Ukraine conflict. Due to the complexity and the uncertainty of the economy, it can be challenging for central banks to determine the best monetary policies to achieve their objectives. Game theory is a useful tool that central bankers can use to predict reactions of different economic agents to changes in the monetary policy. The game will involve players who can be the central bank and the other economic agents. The central bank strategies will depend on its policy objectives, while the other player strategy will be to maximize their own utility. One limitation of the traditional models is the assumption of rational behavior by the economic agents. So, Asako and Okuda proposed a more realistic approach, which is the evolutionary game theory model that considers the possibility of irrational behavior and evolution over time. Using this model, if the economy experiences a high inflation, central banks may favor raising interest rates, while during low growth, they may lower interest rates.
To conclude this report, inflation is a complex economic phenomenon that can have significant impacts on businesses, individuals, and countries. By understanding its causes and consequences, policymakers have to develop effective solutions to manage inflation. The role of central banks in game theory can provide valuable insights on how to address inflation and promote economic stability. Thank you for listening to us in this presentation.